Hello, welcome to Grid Live NASCAR Weekend Preview. Big weekend. Everyone getting ready for the Bristol Stomp. Bristol Motor Speedway. Very excited. I'm Joe Samaniega, and with me we have Tanner Smith from the Pit Box Press. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Plus, we got to update our Buy Me Coffee YouTube Super Chat. Amber now has 5 from the Grid Live After Dark show last week. And then I believe even we got to include Day in the Life in there as well, too, for his contribution during that show. And we encourage everyone visit our social media accounts across social media at Grid Network TV and gridnetworktv.com. Matthew Bros weekly NASCAR recaps there. Grid Rankin and Journeys both in week 2 right now. Tanner, let's get started with week 2 for the Grid Rankin. Of course, busy weekend. We got 10 plus races. Like, oh man, we haven't had that yet. But the big one that's going to end the day, Bristol, the NASCAR Cup Series, the last great Coliseum, rooted in NASCAR history. And overall, this had been a venue that became a very popular ticket in the 80s. They expanded the 90s. Kept expanded in 2000s. Over 50 plus events sell out. You had a long wait list of years before you could get a ticket in there. But then that all changed. 2007, Kyle Busch wins. And famously, we're repaving it and it's going to be a better Bristol. Well, a lot of fans didn't like this new Bristol. So it reminds me of old Coke, new Coke. When Coca-Cola tried that experiment in the 80s and then they went back. Since then, they made changes to bring back the old Bristol, but I feel like it still has yet to reclaim that pre-2007 vibe. But last year at this event, we got something totally different. I think this is what a lot of people are sort of hoping for. The extreme tire wear, the tire falloff, because I'll be honest, last year when we had those first 2 cautions for, I believe it was Kyle Busch, I couldn't recall who was the second person. Maybe it was Denny Hamlin. Since it was so early on and looked like we're going to have tire issues, I thought it was going to be a mess. But then the drivers adjusted their driving. They became pacing themselves. And then next thing you know, that last green flag run of pit stops where Josh Berry was the first one to make the pit stop. And then it looked like he just had superpowers and just passing cars left and right. My goodness, it became a fan favorite event. The temperature for this weekend is forecast to be around 63 degrees, very similar to last year. Do you think everyone is hoping for a repeat of last spring with the massive tire fall off again?
I think that would be a really nice thing to want to see out of this race this weekend, but it seemed like from what Goodyear was trying to tell us that weekend and beyond that they don't really know how they came about that same tire mixture. So I have a lot of doubts that they're going to ever be able to replicate it. And hopefully that doesn't set up everybody's expectations that this race will play out exactly like last year's. As great as that would be, I also did not love the kind of insanity that kind of came with it. It seemed like it was really hard to kind of keep up with who had just pitted and, who needed to pit and where everybody was on the track, because it just seemed like every 30, 40 laps, you'd have to dive back down to pit road. That said, I did really like the amount of fall off that we saw last year, though I would like it to be a little bit more controlled if it were to reach a similar level this year. Obviously not in the way that we would start throwing cautions willy-nilly just to make sure drivers get their tires changed, a la 2008 Brickyard. But I think a more controlled chaos in this race where teams are able to effectively manage their tires a little bit better than they did last year, along with, some, more dynamic racing because of the multiple grooves. I think we could see a race somewhat similar to last year, but I could see the tires probably lasting closer to 80 to 100 laps, which is about half of a fuel run, versus what we had last year where they were barely lasting 40 to 50.
One of the things I'm 100% agreement with is like it has to be a little. Last year was a little bit on the more chaotic side because we had that last green flag run last year, and there was drivers Ty Gibbs, I think Ryan Blaney, maybe Christopher Wells. They had flat tires. They were on the track, and we did not get a caution. Which kudos to NASCAR because it's allowed the pit cycle to go through and the excitement of that race, but you can't rely on everyone to be careful again. There could be a big crash, there could be a caution, so it will be helpful if the teams did have an idea how the tires will perform. Encourage everyone to chat and participate. Jason M. Diet Coke, sort of reference to that. And then from J Dog, could Denny get his third in a row? Well, let's talk about Denny Hamlin. He is going for three in a row. He won here the night race 2023. Spring of 2024, the tire fiasco mess or the tire classic mess, whichever you call it. But we got to talk also about who won here the last time in race, the night race, Kyle Larson. Now, Joe gets racing. Darlington, we were talking about, they're not looking good. They don't have the pace. Then near the end of the race, hey, they're all in the top 10. They're looking good. Not Briscoe, but everybody else. And then Hamlin gets the win to make it two in a row. So now he's going to try to make three in a row. It's Bristol. He has a really good shot. But the one thing I got to say, that speed in Joe Gibbs racing, I think has to be there, especially for qualifying, because since 2020, the only driver to win from outside the top five, 2022 night race, Chris Buescher. So Tanner, is Joe Gibbs racing again looking at a potentially bad qualifying effort, or do you think Denny Hamlin, Christopher Bell potentially put themselves out there? But if not, if they're in the back, could they work their way to the front to get that win?
I think starting in the back this weekend is going to be a death sentence for anybody that qualified lower than 20th. And it brings me no joy to say that, but unfortunately with the diffuser that is on the bottom of this car creating dirty air and just generally how this car handles and drives, it'll be very difficult for these drivers to make their way through the field simply because of the challenges presented by dirty air. Now, with that in mind, I do think that given their relative position in the points and their finishes over the past couple of weeks, guys like Hamlin and Bell will have no problem qualifying closer to the end of the grid in terms of they'll be qualifying later than everybody else when the track is a little bit more rubbered in and has a little bit more speed in the track. You hear drivers talk all the time about getting a bad draw in qualifying that does unfortunately tend to adversely affect your qualifying result. You may feel like you're going fast and then you clock in at 27th. So as far as qualifying efforts concerned for Hamlin and Bell, that shouldn't really be much of an issue. Briscoe, he was kind of non-existent last week, and that'll affect his matrix positioning for this week in qualifying, but he also hasn't exactly been what I would consider a stalwart at this track by any stretch. And then Ty Gibbs, who, let's not forget, last year he swept the stages and led, I believe, almost or over half the race, and eventually ended up slinking back towards the end of the race because he did not manage his tires at all and obviously wasn't able to get a good result. Now, with all of that in mind, I think that JGR will probably be coming into this weekend with a lot of speed among all four of their cars. It seems like Chris Gabehart is starting to gel a little bit better with the crew chiefs and each individual driver, trying to figure out the different things they need out of their cars. So I would expect JGR to have a strong weekend, but let it just be known, if you get stuck into any sort of traffic this weekend as far as, a bad qualifying effort is concerned, your race may already be over before it starts. So qualify well or be prepared to fight to stay on the lead lap.
Yeah, and that has always been an issue, in my opinion, with Bristol. Even in the Winston Cup era, if you were 21st or worse in qualifying, guess what? You're pitting in the backstretch before we did the procedure of everyone entered the same time and you get out the same way. You were going to be losing positions every time we had a yellow flag, caution, and pit stops. You're going to be in the back. You got the leader coming up quickly to the front. Easily you could get in trouble. So many things could go wrong, and this is still, while fans might be in a disagreement of, oh, we missed the old Bristol, this is not the new Bristol, or I'm happy with this Bristol, or I love this tire wearing management Bristol. It is still one of the hardest tracks to beat, especially as we get to some of the stats later on in the show. You look at the top 10 from that last race, Ty Gibbs, like you said, swept the stages. I remember thinking, he got this race. He has the best cars, but lacked the tire management compared to Hamlin, Truex, who almost got to Hamlin a couple times last year. Those were your top two finishers. Brad Keselowski was third place, another veteran. Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, those were your top five. And then the top 10, John Hunter Nemechek. He had a great day. He nearly won that second stage. In fact, it became a 5-car battle. Buescher, Elliott, Gibbs, Bell, 6 through 10. I think it's safe to say 9 of the 10 of those cars potentially win. Are there other drivers, though, you'll be looking at as potential winners?
Of those 9, I mean, obviously Truex is no longer in the field, but I think the driver you were intending to point toward was John Hunter Nemechek, not necessarily being a strong contender, but hey, it's not entirely unheard of for the 43 car or the 42 car for that matter to get around Bristol in a significant fashion. I believe Richard won his fair amount of races there himself. But even then, Legacy has been making gradual steps towards contention this season. But even then, at a track like this, where again, you have to have a good qualifying effort to really make your way to the front of the field, I think it'd be extremely challenging for him to capitalize. Same thing goes for Brad Keselowski at this point in the season, though obviously Bristol last year was one of his better tracks in the spring. He wasn't able to replicate that speed in the fall, and that's why he fell out of the playoffs in the round of 16 to the surprise of many. Alex Bowman, I think that he could have a very strong run here, especially if it becomes a tire management race. But again, it's definitely going to be coming down to qualifying, and his matrix right now is probably not the best after a pitiful last 2 weeks out of the 48 crew. Kyle Larson, he's not going to qualify late in the going this week, so I would be a little bit hesitant to say that he'll have a great weekend right off the jump, but we've seen him just lay a hot lap before and put the car on pole and go on to lead almost every lap of the race like we did last fall. So it's entirely possible that he goes out and has a great weekend. Chris Buescher, I definitely think he could have a great day, especially if he continues this run he's been on where he doesn't really get stage points, but then he surprise ends up 7th at the end of the race. Chase Elliott, very noted for being very careful with his equipment. I could see him having a great run. Christopher Bell, I think this year could be the year that he wins on the concrete at Bristol rather than just the dirt like he did 2 years ago. And as I discussed, I think Ty Gibbs could have a good performance, but again, it just all comes down to qualifying position, and not all of these guys can qualify in the top 10. I mean, in theory they could, but it would be a Herculean task for all 10 of the top 10 finishers from last spring to have a top 10 spot coming into this weekend. So I'd say most of these guys are, solid shots for this win, but until we see cars hit the track and see how these tires are going to react, we really don't have any clue of what this race is going to offer us. Will it be a multi-groove race like we saw a few years ago in the Bristol night race in 2023, where drivers can make speed on the bottom or the top, or is it going to be a race like last year where you don't really know what's happening until the last 50 laps, or is it going to be like last fall where one guy got out to the front with a super fast car and nobody could get by him, which is also coincidentally what happened last week at Darlington. So it's impossible to say, but I would say that most of the drivers in that top 10 from last year are pretty solid shots for this weekend, assuming they get a good starting spot.
The starting spot is going to be so key, and that's what I'm looking for is qualifying, because I feel for Keselowski particularly, if he is qualified, like you said, outside of top 20, I don't see him getting a good result. He'll be lucky if he gets a top 10. Nemechek, if he could have a top 15 starting slot, which I think might be doable for Legacy Motor Club, him, Eric Jones, and they could be contenders for a top 10 finish. But then we're talking about Bell, Gibbs, Elliott. They're, of course, the Hendricks, the Gibbs drivers. They should be in the top 10, and I think those are going to be really the big ones to be watching. One thing that has surprised me, though, we've talked about Bowman, we talked about Larson, we talked about Elliott. I did not bring up William Byron. And when I was looking at the stats, this surprised me. William Byron at Bristol, 11 starts, 0 laps led, only 2 top 5 finishes, 4 top 10s. Last year, 35th in this event, multiple laps down, 17th at the last race here. Overall, another driver that also has not so great stats here and had a lousy Darlington compared to Byron. Bubba Wallace, also 11 starts. He has 22 laps led at Bristol, great, but only 1 top 5 finish and 2 top 10s. He did get third last time here, the night race. Who do you think is going to have a better day, Bubba Wallace or William Byron?
Bubba Wallace, and it's not really that much of a question. And this is no shade or hate to William Byron. It's just that I don't think that this track really suits his driving style at all. And I think that for someone like Bubba, who very clearly last year hit on a setup in the fall race that they were able to be one of the few cars that was able to pass through the second half of the event, it was pretty impressive, and something that I felt the booth and NBC failed to adequately talk about during the event, because unfortunately we were too focused on the 30th place car slowing down a top 10 car in order to make the next round of the playoffs. And luckily for Daniel Suarez and that 99 crew, they were able to hold up Ty Gibbs just enough that he was able to convert and advance, but still it kind of made the broadcast less enticing and less exciting because we were watching what effectively ended up being lapped cars racing each other. So yeah, I think that Bubba Wallace, given his recent success here and his Toyota teammates that he's able to kind of work off of, he'll obviously have a bit of a leg up compared to the Hendrick cars, especially if this tire is even remotely similar to last year's tire. As we saw last week, William Byron, when the tires started to really wear out, he wasn't really able to control his car, which is something I've noticed about him many times in the past, is that he kind of drives his car at his pace, and if that burns the tires off in 25 to 30 laps, then it burns the tires off in 25 to 30 laps. But Bubba Wallace, I think he knows how to take care of his equipment a little bit more, maybe from his time being with RPM in the late 2010s. But yeah, I think that Wallace in 2311 will likely have a bit more of a technical advantage over the Hendrick cars, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Bubba end up with another top 5, maybe even a top 10, or possibly in winner's circle at the end of Sunday. So yeah, I definitely think Bubba could have a better run than Byron, but it is the 24 crew. It is HMS. You never really know what you're going to get out of them outside of it's probably going to be a solid car. So if Bubba intends to, run better than Byron and run better than a majority of his competition, then his pit crew is going to have to nail their stops like they have been, and they're going to hopefully not get caught out by a random caution in the middle of pit stops like they did last week.
The pit stops are going to be something else, especially if it's anything like the third stage of last year's Bristol race where we had that green flag from, but everybody was so reluctant to pit. They just did not want to pit until we have to, and especially once they saw, look what Barry's doing out there, just blasted by everyone in a Stewart-Haas Ford. The Ford drivers, the last Ford driver to win here, of course, Chris Buescher, 2022, but also before him, going back to 2020, Kevin Harvick. Then Keselowski in the spring of 2020. And then quite a ways back to Kurt Busch in 2018. And then Joey Logano has won in 2015 and 2014. So only 3 past winners in the Ford camps. You have Ryan Blaney, always fast. Austin Cindric, getting better and better, more experience. They have to be expected sort of to win as a Penske driver. Ryan Preece, he is 5th in the highest average finishing drivers here, 11.5.
That's got to be a typo, right? There's
Rating
no
reference,
really. That's crazy.
Highest, so
wow,
that's I know. Impressive. I believe in the last 6 races, that's where he is. So
that's pretty solid.
Pretty solid. So I don't expect anything from Front Row Motorsports. RFK, we sort of talked about Keselowski. He has to be perfect in qualifying. Buescher could be a favorite. Josh Berry, I mean, he did really good here last time. Ran out of tires, just finished outside the top 10. But then, since his win at Vegas, that 21 team, 17th, and then 2 finishes outside the top 30, including last weekend at Darlington with that crash. Who is the best hope for Ford to get the win?
It'll be between one of the 2 Team Penske drivers in Ryan Blaney or Joey Logano. Logano obviously has a very decorated legacy here at Bristol Motor Speedway, having won 2 of the night races, and he generally finds speed at pretty much any track, and I would suspect that he'll return to his throne this weekend in terms of getting back into the top 10 and running there and staying there the whole race. Ryan Blaney, though, is definitely kind of your boom or bust pick. He has had so much speed here in the past. In fact, the 2018 spring race, he put on a clinic, I believe was on his way to winning both of the first 2 stages, and then got wadded up in an extremely peculiar incident that had nothing to do with him and took him out of the event. There was also the 2022 night race where he contended for the first 60 or so laps until the setup of his car forced tire failures and put him in the wall, and then eventually out of the race. So as far as Blaney is concerned, he doesn't really have the track record here that would give someone the impression that he is going to do well this weekend. But the way that 12 team has run this season and the success that they have had isn't really lining up. And this could be a weekend where the 12th team finally puts all the pieces together and finally gets a long-awaited win at a track that they've been strong at many times in the past, but it could also just be the next spot of their next blown engine or pit road miscue. So we'll have to see, but I also wouldn't count out Josh Berry. He is quite strong here, and I think that being with a team that is aligned with Team Penske rather than SHR last year, the improved equipment and data that he's going to get from his teammates, quote unquote, that will definitely help set him up for success this weekend. So unlike last year, I think we're going to see more Fords contending in this event, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they manage to take themselves out of the race in one way or the other.
It seems like Ford just is snake bit with bad luck, and I feel, especially Barry, since that Vegas win, because he had a top 5 finish, I believe, in Phoenix. Top 5 for sure was a top 10.
It was a top 5. He started and finished fourth.
That's right. Finished fourth, started fourth. Gets that win. And I thought, okay, now they could just start putting together good races. Well, we have pit road issues. Okay, that's not good. Again, pit road issues. Homestead, Marksville, nothing. Darlington, oh, you're looking good. Gonna put good finish. Contact with Tyler Reddick. Crashes out. And it's like, for the fast cars do not have the results, and they just need to put together a good finish. Logano, he's knocking on the door, I think. I think he's a lot closer to win than most people give him credit for. Then we'll see what happens with Blaney. I feel those are sort of the big three, but Todd Gillian had a pretty decent run here with the tires going out and him being the top 10 for a while. Didn't get there at the end, but overall, a lot of potential from the Ford camp. I don't think they're significantly that far behind. Qualifying is going to be the indicator. If they are up towards the front, they're going to be contending for wins.
I mean, Ford built the best car last weekend, and unfortunately, they didn't get the win for it. So I think if the Ford teams can just figure out pit road and whatever is happening there, they'll be just fine. It's just they gave the 12 car bad engines for 2 of the weeks, and then the pit road stuff has just kind of set them behind. Like Ryan Blaney probably could have 3 or 4 wins already this season had certain things not happen the way they went down. So I don't think they're lacking in speed by any stretch. It's just they don't have the circumstances or the results to really back up how fast that they've been. And eventually it breaks one of 2 ways. Your team either meets the performance with the equipment, or the equipment starts to match the other stuff that's happening. So if you're Team Penske and you're Ford, you are hoping that it's the former and not the latter.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think Penske, as folks may have seen on social media, they were over at the White House being recognized for the Indy 500 NASCAR Championship. Hopefully that's a little boost of momentum for them to, hey, let's go out there, get wins. Of course, IndyCar is also racing too, so it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully what happens, no slum, bad luck from visiting the president, but you just never know. Eric Jones, we know overall people see him as a short track racer that likes Bristol. Jones has 13 starts, has led 293 laps, 4 top 5, 5 top 10 finishes. You compare him to Tyler Reddick at Bristol, 7 starts, so a little less than half. 7 laps led, 4 in the first race last year, 3 in the second race, but only 1 top 5 finish back in 2020 with Richard Childress Racing. That is also his only time he was in the top 10 as well. Reddick has a pattern I've been noticing. Las Vegas, outside the top 10. Next race, top 10 finish. Marksville, no top 10 finish. Darlington, top 10 finish. Considering his driving style, do you believe the pattern will continue? And that means no top 10 finish for Reddick at Bristol.
Absolutely, unfortunately. I don't know what it is about these like really small tracks and Tyler Reddick. They just don't mesh. He has never really been strong in Martinsville, and it doesn't seem like he's very strong at Bristol on the concrete version of it. But on the dirt, he was quite formidable. He finished second twice in the 3 races that they had, and probably would have finished even better in the first event that they had there on the dirt, but wasn't really able to convert. Now, as far as 2311 is concerned, like I mentioned, I think Bubba Wallace is poised for a strong race. I think that Charles Denike being on the pit box, having his success with Christian Eckes at that track in the Truck Series, he should be able to translate some of those same principles over to Wallace's setup for this weekend and give them a strong result. But Reddick, who has never really displayed speed at this track, granted he did get that 1 top 5 in 2020, but that was his rookie season when we didn't have practice and qualifying. So I don't really know how much stock we can really put into that. Not only that, it was in the Gen 6 car, not the Gen 7. And since that car has been introduced, he has not run well there. So I definitely would not be optimistic if I was a 45 team fan going into this weekend in terms of hoping for a good result. But maybe some of the stuff that Hamlin and Wallace and Christopher Bell to a lesser extent can kind of extend towards Reddick might be able to help him get more up to speed and find something that's more comfortable for him, because it's so weird. It just seems like a track that he would do well at. He's great at Homestead and some of these other like progressively banked tracks that you have to carry a good bit of speed through, but at Bristol he just doesn't really have the pace. So it'll be interesting to see how the 45 team kind of responds this weekend. I think that they'll have a pretty preferable spot in terms of qualifying order. They'll probably be towards the back end because they're high up in points and they had a great result last week. But at the same time, the history just does not look very bright for this weekend. So I'm going to have to say regrettably that Reddick probably won't get a top 10 this weekend, but it's not completely out of the question.
I have to agree. I think it's not going to be a good, fun weekend for Tyrek. Just after Martinsville, when I thought it was like, I think Tyrek have, then it's like he goes out there, it's like, no, he's not. Darlington, I think that's definitely more of his style. Bristol is just still, you have to be so good. You have to be good car, good everything. I think you can't really rely on your driving style to just get you towards the front. How you do, there's something about Bristol. It's just, it is one of the toughest tracks. Chris Buescher called it a crown jewel race when he won in 2020, the night race. Big tradition for so many people, and I think a lot of folks see that as sort of a big deal, going out there to trying to get the win at Bristol Motor Speedway. And of course, it's going to be stage one, 125 laps. Then another 125 laps, get us to halfway at 250. Then 250 laps for stage three. Fuel window 175 to 178. So really, you're going to see, unless the tire situation occurs, the first two stages, no green flag pit stops, and maybe one in the last one, which, again, we're just lacking those green flag pit stops. And we saw in how it could make a big difference in a race, especially in Las Vegas. Just a caution coming out, and it could just change up everything. I can't imagine what the crew chiefs are going through. This is not just a typical, there's going to be cautions. You can take care of the time. No, we just don't know. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see what happens this weekend at Bristol. Let's go ahead and get ready for pick a winner. Pull up the leaderboard right here, and encourage everyone to comment with who do you think is going to win the Bristol race. Over in pick a winner, the leaderboard right here. We got 21 people on the leaderboard. A couple new folks from the Grid Life After Dark got their names on the board. There are 10 races this weekend, so we could easily see a big change in the leaderboard. You could end up with the lead, Tanner, if you play your cards right. And Matt, and Kobe don't play your cards right at all. So for the NASCAR Cup Series, Bristol, the Food City 500, who do you think is going to win the race?
I went with him last week. I'm going back with him again to go for 3 in a row. We're going with James Dennis Allen Hamlin, driver of the number 11 Toyota.
Denny Hamlin, he has to be a good contender for the win. I think I'm going to go with the driver that got the win the last time, the night race here, and hopefully does not have an issue like he did at Darlington and crashes out. I'm going to go with Kyle Larson for the win. Now, as I mentioned, we got 10 races to go through, so we could go ahead. Formula One, do you have any predictions for the Bahrain Grand Prix this weekend?
I am leaning towards Piastri, but I don't really want to see anybody on track just yet. But I mean, the McLaren has just looked so fast, and I think that last week's Red Bull performance from Max was more of a red herring than anything else. I think that that car is good when it is in clean air and not anywhere else. So if you can just out qualify Max, if you're the McLaren drivers, then you'll have no problems with him the rest of the season, I feel like. But yeah, I think that Piastri is probably my preliminary choice. Now, as for IndyCar at Long Beach, I'm going with Colton Herta. I think him returning to his home state will definitely be something of a homecoming for him. He'll be able to take in the Southern California sun. And I think that with, unfortunately, the hybrid technology in the IndyCar series, the teams haven't quite exactly figured out how to overcome that odd power deficit when drivers are both initializing the hybrid and the push to pass. So I think as that continues to happen, we'll see less and less passing at road courses, especially the street courses. So I think Herta gets the pole and kind of runs away with it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Alex Palou makes it 3 in a row. As for MotoGP, I'm going with Marc Marquez for obvious reasons. And then an IMSA, I'm assuming we're just picking a team for that. So I will pick the Porsche number 7 for the DPI. Or, well, GTD. That's their name now, right?
Yep. GTD.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll be going with the Porsche Penske number 7 team this week.
I went with the number 6 Porsche.
Oh, there you go.
So it's going to be, I think, a Porsche, just both looking good, both cars. MotoGP, Marc Marquez. I mean, Kiska's back on the leaderboard of Marc Marquez scores a win for 2025. IndyCar. There's a sign me, it's like if it was any other track, I'll be leaning, especially if it was Barber Motorsport Park, I would say Alex Palou. But for Long Beach, Colton Herta has to be a favorite. I'm also looking at Kyle Kirkwood, another good driver out there.
I believe Marcus Ericsson even had a good run here last year in the Andretti cars, so it's not entirely out of the realm that Andretti has a great weekend.
Yeah, so Andretti, they're looking pretty good. I think I may go with a Chevy driver. Maybe I'll go with Scott McLaughlin to snap the win streak. I mean, a lot of hype about him entering the season for being potential championship contender. You're going to be a championship contender. You need to get a win to prove you're worth the talk. And Formula One, I got to agree. I think it's going to be a McLaren, especially this track seems to best suit them. Those first 2 straights, that third straight coming towards the main straight. Those are going to be strengths for McLaren. So I think it's going to be, I'll go Lando Norris for Formula One. And with that said, we are all out of time right here. Big thank you again to all our Patreon investors, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in the Grid Network. Of course, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Chat will thank you on the air. And of course, social media, gridnetworktv.com, our website, plus video clips. And of course, the Grid Ranking, Grid Endurance Performance Index. They are up and running. And pick a winner, hashtag. We post every Wednesday, and we encourage everyone to participate. Still over 150 races to go for 2025. So plenty of time to catch up to the leaders. For Tanner Smith, I'm Joe Samaniego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and enjoy the races.